السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ما بعد. We hope and we pray that everyone is doing well tonight, inshallah ta'ala, in one of these blessed nights of Ramadan. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He accepts from us all of our good deeds during this month, that He accepts from us our fasts, our prayers, our qiyam, our fasting, our acts of charity, and our du'as, Ya Rabbil Alameen. To proceed, since the month of Ramadan is winding down, I wanted to share, inshallah ta'ala, a few points about what Ramadan does to us and what we can do as a consequence outside of Ramadan. Okay? Ramadan, what does this mean? It means that Ramadan exposes us. Ramadan exposes us that we're not as truthful as we claim we are. It doesn't mean that we're liars. It means that Ramadan exposes us that we constantly underestimate ourselves in almost every way possible. And Ramadan exposes us that certain traits that we claim that we don't have, we actually do. So, for an example, a person comes, Sheikh, I'm not patient. I don't have any patience. You know, the other day I lost patience, the other day this, I don't have any patience. And in reality, you can ask him, brother, did you fast Ramadan? Yes. That means you're very patient. If you were to bring a person off the street and told him, hey, I want you for 30 days to fast, no food, no water, for 30 days, from dawn to sundown. Oh no, there's no way I can do that. Even if he's the most disciplined person, he'll find it difficult for him to imagine this, because oftentimes what happens is, our imagination, the fear of something is worse than the thing itself. Because they don't know, so they're just basing it off of what their perception is. And Muslims fall into this trap all the time. So we claim to be impatient, or we Oh, I feel like I don't want to go to the masjid because I don't know if I'll have ikhlas. Or I don't want to do this because I don't know how sincere I'll be. Ya do it. Sincerity is an ongoing process. It's not a switch. Like, now I'm going to be sincere and then you're going to, la. It's an ongoing process. It's before, during, and after. It's a mindset. It's an attitude. Sah? But it needs to continue. Ramadan exposes us that we can be very sincere. I'm not saying oftentimes we're not, but we set sometimes this impossible goal where we think that insincerity is impossible, so therefore I'm not going to do it. And this is wrong. And then the opposite is true, where you do the deed, unfortunately for the wrong reasons, where fasting shows us that you can do it with the right reasons, inshallah ta'ala. Okay? Number 3. Ramadan exposes us that we, as Muslims, can be on time and can be prompt. And we can follow the details. And we can do things right. Correct? We become hyper diligent. In Ramadan, we follow everything to the minute. Maghrib is, 7:51. And not a minute sooner. And everybody's on time. Perfectly on time. Ramadan exposes us that we're not as careless as we think we are. Which means that we have to go back and review ourselves. Why are we careless outside of Ramadan? What happens? And I'm saying this, I'm guilty of this as well. The month of Ramadan exposes us. Why is it that I have a hard time keeping my word, my promises, and my appointments outside of Ramadan? But inside of Ramadan, we follow things to the T. Even in the beginning of the month, Ramadan teaches us precision. We don't start a day early, a day late. We start right when we know that it's time to start the month. And you fast at the beginning of the month. You can't fast Yawm al-Shak. You can't fast the day of doubt. Meaning the last day of Sha'ban, you can't fast it. The day when people go out to look for the moon, you can't say, you know what, we'll just start 2 days early. That way we guarantee that we catch Ramadan. La. Hada haram. The Prophet ﷺ forbade it. Why? Because promptness is more important than being careful. Following the instructions is more important than you trying to cover your tracks and making a mess out of things. Because imagine if that was okay, Muslims, how early would they start then? It would become a snowball effect. Where you're starting a day early, and a person comes and says, I'm going to start 2 days early. And another person comes and says, I'm going to start 3 days early. And a person comes and says, I'm going to start a week early. And it becomes a snowball. Where the Prophet forbade it so that nobody goes into that, it's khalas. This is when it starts, this is when it ends, no fat. You have to. Ramadan exposes us. So far, what does Ramadan expose us in? What are the 3 things that we showed? Patience, sincerity, promptness. Ramadan exposes us in terms of our willpower. Right? Discipline. Where we think, oh, I can't be disciplined. I can't control myself. I don't have willpower. What does Ramadan do? It exposes all of these false claims that you do have a lot of willpower, you do have a lot of discipline. When a person says, Shaykh, I have no control, I just can't stop. Did you stop at Ramadan? Yeah. You can stop outside of Ramadan. You understand what I'm saying? Ramadan exposes us. We make these claims. So you guys see a theme emerging right now. We have the potential to be that ideal Muslim, and we already know it. We see it in ourselves. And Ramadan exposes us because we think that we can't be that good potential Muslim when you already were. You already are. The difference is we just need to continue that mindset after Ramadan. And obviously, it's not going to be perfect the same way it is in Ramadan. Ramadan is special. We understand this. But there's certain things that we can definitely continue. Ramadan brings out the best of the ummah and we see it. And I can tell you, there's not a time in which we need the best of the ummah more than now. With everything going on around the world, we need good Muslims. We need them strong Muslims. A person says, Shaykh, I don't have time to go to the masjid. So this is number 5. Person says, "Yeah, I don't have time to go to the masjid." Did you go every night in Ramadan to Taraweeh? Yes, I did. What happened? You did. Did you stop working? No, I was still working. Did you stop everything else? No, I was still doing most of the things. طيب, why was it that you were able to go every single night in Ramadan, and now after Ramadan we barely see you once a week? Barely. What happened? What's different? You understand what I'm saying? Obviously, you're not going to go every night. I mean, unless you do, mashallah, may Allah reward you. There are people who do that. They make that intention. But what's the difference? What happened? You guys understand this? What is the difference, by the way, in this point? It is a blessed month. Say that again. Meaning outside of Ramadan? Okay. But like why, so obviously, like he said, it's a blessed month, which is why it's easier to go every night in Ramadan than it is outside. Why don't people come every night outside of Ramadan? Awlawiyat, priorities, yes? No, wait. Is Ramadan obligatory for you to come to the masjid? It's not. Are the Taraweeh obligatory? No. One scholar, he said, for you to attend Salat al-Asr in Jama'ah in Ramadan, there's more reward in that one Salah than the entire Taraweeh. Correct? According to a hadith, there's some weakness to it, but that's what it says. Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. Yeah, you're going because you know this is what we do. But why don't you tell yourself, this is what I do, even outside of Ramadan? Because now, when you say, this is what I do, it becomes what? Part of your identity. When it becomes part of your identity, it becomes a habit. And it becomes automatic, you don't even think about it. So no willpower needed. So in order to do that, 0 willpower needed, which is a blessing. That's why the people who pray 5 times a day, they don't exert any willpower to pray. The person who struggles with prayer is because he's trying to exert willpower and he's failing. That's not how you actually pray. You don't need willpower to pray. If you're using willpower, you're thinking about it wrong. Sah? So what does that mean? That means that the person who prays regularly 5 times a day has made it part of his identity, and so you no longer need willpower to decide whether you're going to pray or not. It's who you are. There's no question of whether I am going to or not. It's I am. This is who I am. I pray. Khalas. And the decision was made one time. 0 willpower needed anymore for this. Does that make sense? That's how it becomes easy. And people reverse it. They think that every time the salat time comes, they have to make a decision. Should I pray? You're asking the wrong question, brother. That you're doing it, you flipped it upside down. This is how one of the ways that shaitan gets to us. So instead, when it becomes part of your identity, so same thing, like going to the masjid. The person who goes to the masjid, when you ask him, he's like, yeah, I just go to the masjid. 0 willpower needed, because this is part of who he is. He goes to the masjid. It's automatic. Now, what's the danger of it becoming automatic? There's a danger. Now you're introducing a new problem. What is it? Exactly. Now, and it becomes aada. The difference between aada and ibadah is what? One letter. What's the letter? The ba. And the ba as a preposition means what? Huh? With or in. Right? Which means it's internal. Okay? It's one letter. The difference between a habit and a worship. And the problem with it being automatic is that it becomes a habit and the person just worships out of habit. And he's no longer focused, the khushu' is gone. So then he needs to renew that intention. And that becomes a new problem. But that's a better problem to have. That's a good problem to have. It's still a problem, but it's a good one. It's better than the person who struggles, right? Does that make sense? Absolutely, yes. Yes. You don't even make the decision. Yeah, I'm going to the masjid. The person who wakes up for Fajr and he wakes up to go pray Fajr in the masjid. It's automatic. He's not even thinking about it. That's what he does. Same thing with everything else, by the way. You can apply this to every habit in your life. People who go to the gym, they no longer, there's 0 willpower in going to the gym regularly because the guy says, I go to the gym. This is what I do. This is part of my identity. I work out. It's not even, I mean, you understand what I'm saying? But it takes building those habits. Ramadan exposes us that we can build habits very quickly. In the month, within the first 3 days of Taraweeh, now you're on automatic, you're on autopilot, you can do it. In fact, some people from the first night, why can't we do this outside of the month? Like I said, you don't have to go every day. But man, it's wild to me, the people who go every day in Ramadan and then you never see them outside of Ramadan. Absolutely wild, because I'm like, man, you were as like more diligent than I was ever. You know what I mean? Like I can see it in the guy's face. And then they turn off the switch outside. Don't be that person. لا تكن رمضانيا. Don't be a Ramadani person. Ramadan exposes us and our biases towards Islam, and that we think that Islam is a religion of difficulty, where in fact Islam is a religion of ease. How do we know this? When you're sick, you can break your fast. If you don't have enough money, you don't have to pay zakah. When you're traveling, you don't have to fast. Yeah, if you can't afford it, you don't have to go to Hajj. When I'm talking specifically Ramadan, فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْ. You know, if you don't have time, khalas, read whatever is accessible, whatever is easy for you. You don't have to force it. The purpose of the fast is not to induce difficulty, it's to induce taqwa. This is why Allah says, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Allah intends for you ease, does not intend for you difficulty. So the purpose isn't to make your life hard, but to induce God consciousness. And that's what happens in fasting. Because now every time you remember hunger, you're like, oh, I'm not eating because of Allah. Because it's automatic tie. It exposes sometimes our biases that we think, and this is important because it comes into play with fiqh issues and all these other things, that we think that the only way for me to get reward is if it's hard. When the shaykh gives the easy fatwa, people are like, oh, I don't like that. I'm not going to follow that. It's too easy. It can't be the true. It can't be correct. Where Allah asks you to worship Him fi s-sarai wa d-dharra, in ease and in difficulty. And sometimes the easy thing is you get more reward. One of the tabi'een actually came to Umar radiallahu anhu and he said, Ya Umar, why do you guys still shorten your prayers? Right? So why was he asking this? The verse in the Qur'an mentions that you can shorten your prayers if you fear that the disbelievers will cause a fitna for you. And يَفْتِنَكُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Right? So it says, هذه زالت. Now, فتح الله البلاد. Everything is conquered. Muslims are all over the world. We can travel safely. Why do we still shorten? And what did Umar say? This is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Accept His gift. It doesn't have to be difficult. It can be easy. And we continue to do things, whether they're easy or they're hard. You're going to fast in the summer, it was hard. But then winter time, it's going to be easy. You still fast. Right? So Ramadan exposes sometimes these things. Ramadan exposes us that we can have a relationship with the masjid. We can have a relationship with the Qur'an. Outside of Ramadan, many of us don't know the Qur'an. Like we don't know, like we don't spend time with it. It's not a friend. It becomes our friend in Ramadan, and then we tell the friend, goodbye, see you next year. But Ramadan exposes us that we can spend more time with the Qur'an than we are spending now. It does. It exposes us that this is something that's possible. We think that it's impossible, but it is very possible. Do you guys see the theme emerging now? Ramadan is exposing us that we have a huge potential that's not hidden. It's actually there. It's clear. And we need to tap into that potential. Why am I saying all of this? Because we paint, and I'm guilty of this, we paint the image of the ideal Muslim as if he lived 1400 years ago, he's inaccessible, there's no way that we can be like him, when in fact every single one of us is him. You guys heard that term? Like it's a Gen Z term, like you're him. You guys heard this? You are him. In the sense that you're already the ideal you're already him in Ramadan. You just need to maintain him and continue it after Ramadan. It's not hard. You're already him. You already are living that potential. I'm dead serious. Any questions so far? There's more. I mean, I can continue going, but
Well, you said, so there are two extremes, which is like if you pray very regularly, you start losing focus, right?
it becomes a habit. Like it's unconscious, it's automatic.
And yeah, then there's one side which is not praying at all.
Absolutely.
So like what would be like the
It's not that you're not praying at all, it's the person who struggles with the prayer and struggles to actually maintain it. Once you get to maintaining it, now the struggle is how do you make sure that it doesn't become autopilot?
yeah. So like how, because sometimes it does, like when you're praying, sometimes like it does become like that for me.
For everybody.
Yeah. How do you?
This is the $1,000,000 question. How to maintain focus in salah? That needs its own lecture series. And people have done it. And people have written entire books on just this topic. That's what I'm saying. It's a $1,000,000 question. This is not something that's overnight. One of the ideas, I'll just share one, is that khushu' begins before you even set foot in prayer. Focus is not a light switch. So you don't approach the prayer and like, okay, I'm going to turn on the khushu' switch, Allahu Akbar, and then I'm focused. Because what does Allah say about khushu' in Surah Al-Baqarah? وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ. Indeed, meaning, it says, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. Seek help in sabr, patience, and salah. And then what does he say? وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ. It's big, meaning it's going to be heavy, except on those who have khushu'. Khushu' is that focus in salah. Right? Let's translate it as that. Who are the khashi'een? Allah didn't leave you without a definition. What's the definition in the next ayah? الَّذِينَ يَظُنُّونَ أَنَّهُمْ مُلَاقُوا رَبِّهِمْ وَأَنَّهُمْ إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. The ones who believe that they will meet their Lord and that to Him they will return. So I said the meeting here, مُلَاقُوا رَبِّهِمْ, either means in the hereafter or in the herein, meaning in the salah itself. So what's the salah? I'm meeting with Allah. Very good. And I'm going to return to Allah. Those two are mindsets and attitudes that exist in the believer before the prayer, after the prayer, and during the prayer. So if you approach it with that mindset, it changes your prayer. It's not a light switch. You have to be, meaning you're constantly focused. Now obviously you can't be constantly 100% focused all the time, but you can be, what is it, locked in? I had a guy, he kept on saying, Sheikh, lock it in. Lock in. You know you gotta lock in. But when you're locked in all the time, it's good. Obviously you don't need to be locked in all the time, but as often as you can. Because then when you approach the salah, you're automatically locked in because you're used to doing it outside. How locked in are we? Because sometimes outside of salah, we're very different people. Outside of the masjid, we're very different people. Outside of our Muslim circles, we're very different people. We're not as locked in as we want to be. So we have to be locked in.
This is the reason we're very different, because the different environment that we live in.
طبعا, of course. Absolutely. The environment of Ramadan is very easy to maintain the worship. But what does that tell us? What should we do outside of Ramadan? Maintain good environments and create an environment where it's easy to be worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a group. Why is it very easy? I mean, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in the hadith that there will come a time يأتي على الناس زمان القابض فيه على دينه كالقابض على الجمر. Right? There will come a time when the person who's holding tightly onto his deen is like a person who's holding onto a hot piece of coal. Right? Then he says, what? وَأَجْرُ الْعَامِلِ فِيهَا كَخَمْسِينَ مِنْكُمْ. The reward of one worshipper from among them is like 50 of you. So the companions hear this and it says, بَلْ مِنْهُمْ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. You mean from them? He says, لَا مِنْكُمْ, from you. Why? لِأَنَّكُمْ تَجِدُونَ عَلَى الْخَيْرِ أَعْوَانًا وَلَا يَجِدُونَ. Because you have helpers to do good and they have no one. Alhamdulillah, so far I don't think this has happened yet. We have helpers to help us worship, which is good. But there are places, there are instances where a person has no one to worship Allah with him. He's very lonely. Because of that, his reward is more because of the difficulty. He didn't induce it on himself, but it's hard to maintain that sense of diligence when you're alone. You're doing it by yourself. But when you have people around you, you have a good brotherhood, a good community, then it becomes easy to worship. So that's another thing that Ramadan exposes in us. Ramadan exposes us in terms of our tongues. We can do a good job in controlling our tongues, even though we claim the opposite. Ramadan shows us we can control all of ourselves, that discipline. Ramadan shows us that we can train our children on so many aspects of Islam, and that our children are actually more mature than we think. So you can get him to fast when he's 10 years old. You can get him to do a lot of things, even though you think that he's too young. Ramadan shows us that we can defeat our laziness. Ramadan shows us that we can have compassion and care for one another. Ramadan shows us what our purpose in life is, and that we know what that purpose is, and we can live it even if we tell ourselves that that's not possible outside of Ramadan. Ramadan exposes us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes us among those who can persist in this after Ramadan, and that continue to do good and be diligent, and that we can be that ideal version of ourselves throughout the entire year, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Does anybody have any questions on this? Inshallah. Okay. Jazakumullah khairan. I'll pass it over to Sheikh Fahad, inshallah ta'ala.
I think that was good, man. Khalas. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya wal-mursaleen nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in ma ba'd. So, let me just kind of start with a question. And that question has to do with something that we're all familiar with. That is the concept of taqwa. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you open Surah Al-Baqarah, after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Alif Lam Mim, He says, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. That this is the book where there's no doubt a guidance for those who have taqwa. However, when you go to, let's say, Surah Al-Luqman, I believe, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, Alif Lam Mim, تِلْكَ آيَاتُ الْكِتَابِ الْحَكِيمِ هُدَى وَرَحْمَةً لِلْمُحْسِنِينَ. These are the verses of the wise book, a guidance and a mercy for the muhsineen. So the question is, in the first ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that this is a guidance for the muttaqeen. In these ayat, He's added mercy. So the question is why? Right? For the muhsineen. So there's a difference here. And we'll come back to that, inshallah. But I wanted to kind of just preface what I was going to say with that, inshallah. So what I wanted to look at very briefly is what you may call like the philosophy of Ramadan. And I know that sounds very heavy. But when we think about the beginning of Ramadan and then the end of Ramadan, it actually has a certain boundary. Okay? And that boundary is encapsulated in certain ayat of Surah Al-Baqarah. Specifically, the ayat Surah 183 to 186, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts off, Ya ayyuhal ladina amanu, kutiba alaykum as-siyam, kama kutiba ala alladina min qablikum, la'allakum tattaqun. Right? That, oh, you have believed, decreed upon you is fasting, as is prescribed upon those before you, so that you may become righteous, or you may have taqwa. Now, the question we want to start off with is, what does fasting have to do with taqwa? What is taqwa? Now the thing is, I'm sure every Ramadan you've had a discussion on taqwa. Was that correct? Is that a safe assumption? Right? So if I asked you what is taqwa, what is it? Awareness? Okay, what else? Let's make it interactive because I don't want to just talk. Yeah. Guard themselves. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah. God consciousness. Protection. I actually like that. So the concept, and I'm sure you know this, that it comes from this concept of protection, like you said, right? When, for instance, we make the dua, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. Right? Oh Allah gives us the best of this life and the best of the afterlife. وَقِنَا, right? Protect us. Taqwa is we protecting ourselves. So we're protecting ourselves from the fire, right? Ittaqun nar, right? We protect ourselves from the punishment of Allah. So it is a protection of ourselves. Now that's the baseline understanding of what taqwa is. But now I wanted to kind of extend this into more about who you are specifically and why taqwa is in fact needed for guidance, and why taqwa is needed for guidance from the Qur'an, and why the Qur'an, right? Taqwa is needed for guidance from the Qur'an. The Qur'an is then needed for shukr, and shukr then leads to dua. And in these ayat, all of these concepts are connected. All right. So let's start with this concept of taqwa in terms of who we are as human beings. And I'm going to use a certain motif, and that motif is the horse. Okay. So first off, the concept of fasting, Sawm. Before the coming of the Prophet ﷺ, the concept was not known amongst the Arabs like we know it today. This concept of a person withholding food and drink from themselves, right, for a certain amount of time was unknown to the Arabs. So where does this concept come from? You see, when the Arabs would go to battle, they would have a choice of a few animals. So one would be the camel, the other would be the horse. I told you the motif is going to be the horse, right? So now if you're in battle, typically, you want an animal that's quick, that's fast, that you can go in and out, you can strike the enemy, you can retreat. So which one would you take, the camel or the horse? The horse. Now the camel has longevity. It can hold a lot of water, and so for a long journey, it's great. But in battle, you want something that's quick, sharp, it can go in, go out, it's strong, you can maneuver it. But there's a problem with the horse. Remember, the camel has longevity. It can last for a very long time. The problem with the horse, however, is that it doesn't have that longevity. So in the middle of the battle, it could just collapse. And then it's it, game over, right? Your horse collapses, the enemy comes upon you, that's it. So in order to prevent this, the Arabs would train the horses outside of the battle season. And how they would do this, they would withhold food and water from the horse for extended periods of time so that the horse could get used to it. And they call this phenomena Sawm. It's from this that you get the concept coming into the Islamic vocabulary of what we know today as Sawm. So that's number one. Second horse motif. In terms of us as human beings, now this is where it gets into the philosophy part, right? Us as human beings, if we ask the question, who am I? If I asked you, who are you? Right? And I think I ask this all the time. So who are you? Musa, all right. Who are you? Shafiq, all right. Who are you? Mustafa, all right. Who are you? Umar, okay. All of y'all gave me just names, right? Usually I get some variety, but I think maybe it's just late, that's why it's all right. Alhamdulillah. Usually I get accountant, lawyer, right? Sometimes I get Abdullah, right? Muslim, right? Okay, anyway. Husband, right? Actually, I've never gotten husband.
Oh, no.
No, I've never gotten husband. I never got a husband, alhamdulillah. But, Now the thing is, when we ask this question, what I know we understand us as our identity, right? This is what our name is. When we introduce ourselves, we say I'm Musa, Mustafa, whatever it might be. But what I'm asking is what you would call the ontological question. Remember, I said we're getting into some philosophy. In other words, at your core, who are you? When I say that this is my hand, who's the my in the sentence? When I say that this is my arm, who's the my in the sentence? Okay. Taking it a different way. Let's say, God forbid, you get into a car accident and you lose your legs, right? May Allah protect us all. Are you still you? What do you think? Yeah, you're still you. Okay, let's say you lose both your arms. Again, may Allah protect all of us. Are you still you? Yes, okay. So the question now is, what makes you, you? There's something much deeper, right? Okay, yeah, go ahead. Your ruh, right? So in essence, who you truly are is not your material body. Yes, it's part of you, but in essence, who you truly are is your ruh. And in your ruh is where you have your consciousness. Now, what do I mean by consciousness? In other words, you have your physical brain, right? But consciousness and your brain are two separate things. Your brain is your physical material. But consciousness is where you have things like inner subjective experience. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, let's say I'm looking at that cooler back there, right? And I say it's orange. How many of you would agree to turn around and take a look at the cooler? Is it orange? Yeah. Some people know. Is it ikhtilaf here on the color? Sheikh Anwar, what color is that? Am I not seeing that right? It's orange, right? Absolutely. Okay. At least I have one person that agrees. All right? Define orange, right? You said it was philosophy. But here's what I'm getting at. You see, I see that as orange, and we can agree that, let's say it's orange. But there's no way for you to know that the color that I see is the same color that you see. For all you know, what you see as orange, I see as red, and we just call it orange. You have no access to that information, which is subjective to me only. That's an inner subjective state to my consciousness only. Okay? So your consciousness is part of your ruh, what makes you you. So far, so good? Okay. Now let me switch here for a second, and I wanted to actually mention something that I find very interesting, that maybe you guys will and maybe you guys won't, I don't know. But when it comes to seeing this concept kind of manifest in the Qur'an, in Surah Sajda. So in the Qur'an, there are certain what they call iltifat, right? What they call grammatical shifts. And I want you to kind of consider this one from Surah Sajda, okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِذَا سَوَيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ that's not the right ayah. الَّذِي أَحْسَنَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقَهُ وَبَدَأَ خَلْقَ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْ طِينٍ. It is He who perfected everything which He created and began the creation of man from clay. All right, I'm going to stop here for a second. I'm going to test your English skills, even though we're talking about the Arabic. All right, so do you guys know what first person, second person, and third person signifies? Right, what's first person? Right? I, me, right? Second person, you. Third person, he, she, them, right? Them, whatever it might be. Okay. The pronouns, right? There you go. So in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الَّذِي أَحْسَنَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقَهُ وَبَدَأَ الْخَلْقَ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْ طِينٍ. It is He who perfected everything which He created and began the creation of man from clay. What is it? First person, second person, or third person? Third person, right? ثُمَّ جَعَلَ نَسْلَهُ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِّن مَّاءٍ مَّهِينٍ. And then He made from His posterity out of an extract of clay, extract of a liquid disdained. Right? I'm doing the translation. First person, second person, third person. Still in third person, right? Okay. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثُمَّ سَوَّاهُ وَنَفَخَ فِيهِ مِن رُوحِهِ. And then He proportioned him and breathed into him the soul, the ruh. All right? First person, second person, third person. We're still in third person. Okay. وَجَعَلَ لَكُمْ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ. And then He made for you hearing, vision, and hearts. First person, second person, third person. Second. Okay, the question is why? Well, why is that their shift? Because it went third person, then all of a sudden it went to second person. Why? Here's why. Because notice the content of what's being said. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the creation of the human being. So in the first part, He's saying He's created and fashioned the human being, right? Perfected everything which He created, bringing the creation of man from clay. Then He says, generations come, you have relationships, it comes from the sperm and so on and so forth. Again, material matter. Okay? So now it's still being spoken in third person. ثُمَّ سَوَّاهُ وَنَفَخَ فِيهِ مِن رُوحِهِ. And then Allah places the ruh in the body. It's still third person. But once the ruh is in the body, because that is the place of the consciousness, now you get the grammatical shift. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَعَلَ لَكُمْ. And we made for you. Why? Because now your ruh is in the body and He can address you because you have a consciousness. Everyone get that? And it's quite phenomenal when you think about it. So who you really are at your core, in fact, is ruhani. It is your ruh. before it is your body. Now, that being the case, let me go back to my horse motif. When we think about who we are, we can say we're actually a composite of two things. We're a composite of a material body and a ruh, a soul. And it's like you can take the analogy of a horse and a rider on the horse. Okay? This material body, it has, well, we are similar to like animals, for instance. Okay? Why? Because we have desires. Animals want to eat, and we eat. We want to eat as well, right? Animals need shelter, we need shelter as well. Animals have, intercourse, we want to do that as well. We get married for that reason, so on and so forth, right? So animals have animal desires, base desires. Animals, from this perspective, their desires and our desires are very similar. However, animal desires are blind. What do I mean? That there's no concept of limitations. Again, if you think about an animal, you're never going to see a lion chasing down a gazelle, and in the middle of the chase, the gazelle said, "Stop! I find what you're doing morally reprehensible. You have to stop. This is terrible. This is, you haven't studied ethics or meta-ethics for that reason. Stop." Right? No means no, right? You won't see that, okay? So, from one perspective, desires are blind, right? Animal desires. Desires in and of themselves don't actually have value from that perspective. The thing that gives it value is actually the ruh, if you really think about it, okay? Now, I was talking about the horse. The rider is the ruh, and the horse is, let's say, the body, your material constitution. So these desires, when you want to now, let's say, fulfill those desires, let's say you want to strengthen those desires, you do that by way of sustenance. In other words, you feed yourself, right? You have a desire for food, you want to eat, okay? So when you want to strengthen your body, your material constitution, you do that by eating food, right? Now, where does food come from? These are not complicated questions. Yes, yeah. Yes, ultimately everything comes from Allah. But I'm saying immediately, where does food come from? The next step, someone's going to be like, Mickey D's, right? Nobody should be eating Mickey D's anyways. Yani, it comes from the earth, right? So when you want to eat, you say you eat fruits, you eat vegetables, you eat potatoes. I think potatoes are some of the most interesting vegetables, right? They actually have a full, interesting genealogy. I don't know if you know this, but in Christian history, they used to be known as the devil's apples. Do you know why? So I'll take a slight tangent here. The reason they were known as the devil's apples is because in early Christianity, when it came to their understanding of sin and salvation and how these things arise, and what is the human constitution, we're talking about what is the human being. For them, they actually imported many ideas from Plato, and one of those ideas has to do with the analogy, not the analogy, what's it called? The allegory of the cave. Okay, so the allegory of the cave is, Plato basically says, that look, everyone, they are in this world, the way that they're witnessing things, it's like people who are stuck in a cave, and there's a fire behind them, and they're seeing shadows on a wall. So all they're seeing is shadows. And if one of these people was to escape, he would see reality. But people are stuck just looking at these shadows. That's not real, because that's what's immediate. The one that escapes has now escaped from this, and so now he can see reality. All right? So in Plato's understanding, ideas and concepts, mathematics, those were higher, that was reality, that was truth. Whereas things that people were busy with in terms of this life, right, earning money, eating food, that was not even real. So this concept gets imported into Christianity. And what happens is they started looking at everything related to the human body and sustaining yourself and earning money, having marital relations, eating food, as being something of a lower quality, something that's not real. The things that are real are things like angels, things that are more ethereal, things that are higher up. So they started to categorize things like this. In fact, that is why when you looked at their concept of sexual relations, their concept was sex in and of itself intrinsically is a sin. Lust is a sin in and of itself. Whereas our conception is that no, intrinsically it's not a sin. Because why? Because if you do it with your spouse, if you do it in the right conditions, you do it with the permission of Allah, it's an act of ibadah. Right? It's like the one joke where the sheikh came in late for Fajr. And they said, Sheikh, what's the problem? You came late. He said, I'm so sorry. One act of ibadah kept me from another act of ibadah. Right? Anyway, so coming back to the Christian, so in early Christian theology, they considered it intrinsically sin. So even if you felt lust, you are held accountable for that. So what you find now is incredible stories of their asceticism, right? Like they would be ascetics where they would have of monasteries where they would be completely cut off from everything related to, you know, your body, the world, and everything else. And by the way, I'm going to do a tangent of a tangent, so I'm taking too many tangents here. But on a side note, when they overtook the Muslims in Spain, they started persecuting the Muslims to such an extent that they would not only force them to say that they were Christians, the Muslims in Spain, at the later stages. And these Muslims who had converted to Christianity but internally were Muslim, they were called Moriscos. So what would happen is that they would come into their houses and they would try to test them. So they would hang a leg of pig in their house. They would cut off a piece and force the Muslim to eat it. They would bring in alcohol and be like, you have to drink this. And so the Muslims, they had gotten fatwa from like North Africa and things like that. And, you know, they were internally Muslim, but externally they couldn't escape. You know, I know from our perspective, like, why didn't they just leave? Sometimes it's not that easy, right? I don't know. Like I remember in Houston, we had some like Hurricane Katrina, whatever. The whole city tried to leave at once. It was impossible. So en masse, you know, you can imagine 100,000 or like 1 million Muslims just trying to leave all of a sudden. It's not possible, right?
Call a U-Haul or something.
Yeah, I mean, it was...
Why are you leaving? Are you Muslim? They would prevent them.
Yeah, so there was a prevention from there. Some of the rich people could leave, so they did leave. They went to North Africa. But nevertheless, so what happens, they would test them. Now, they would test them in everything. Now, the one place where the Muslims where they kind of fell apart is when they would ask them to curse the Prophet ﷺ. That, for some of them, was too much. They would rather have death than do that. They would say, come, curse the Prophet ﷺ, and that was the test where they got them many times. But the one other test that they had, which is where my tangent is going to, is they would check if they would take showers, if they would bathe. Why? Because even bathing was considered very earthly, very part of your body, and in early Christianity they wouldn't bathe because it was something just part of this temporary world. Again, that Platonic idea of this is just fake, and the higher idea of angels and ethereal and ideas and things like that, that's higher. So they wouldn't even bathe. So if they caught a Muslim bathing, especially on Friday, they're like, nope, this is a problem, right? So the hygiene of the Muslim was what was put at stake. Anyway, so coming back to my initial point, which was the devil's apples, is where this tangent started from. And that was potatoes. Why I'm saying that is because even when it came to the food items, they categorized them in this taxonomy. They would say, okay, things that are been grown in the earth, they're like an evil type of food, whereas things that are grown on trees are better, right? Apples and oranges and things like that. And if, in fact, if you have something else that's different, then okay. So things of the earth. So potatoes, because where do you find potatoes? In the ground, right? So they would say these are like the devil's apples. So potatoes were considered almost haram, you can say. Anyway, coming back to it, so the initial question was, where do we get our food from? And we said it was from the earth. Where is our material constitution created from? The earth, right? We were created from teen, we were created from earthly components. So in other words, our material constitution, in order for it to get its sustenance, in order to get its food, in order to upkeep itself, it has to go from its source. It has to get its sustenance from its source. Okay? But we said that the human being is like a two-pronged composite. It is a human, like, so we have not human, but we have our material constitution, then we have our ruh. So if the material body needs its sustenance from its source, where does the ruh get its sustenance from? Its source. But do we know the source? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ. They ask you concerning the ruh. قُل, say, الرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. Say that the ruh is from the command of Allah, the amr of Allah. Okay? How does Allah issue commands? Either, okay, we went right, jumped right to it. إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. That when Allah issues a command, He merely says to it, be, and it is. So where is the ruh from? It is from the command of Allah, the words of Allah. Do we have access to the words of Allah? Yes, we do. And He said it. The Qur'an, right? So when the writer needs its sustenance, where does it get its sustenance from? The Qur'an. Now, 11 months out of the year, you are feeding that horse like crazy. Okay? Like literally shoveling food into this horse, right? So the horse is extremely strong. The rider, on the other hand, like Sheikh Anwar is mentioning, the Qur'an is kind of Ramadan finishes and then we retire the Qur'an, right? 11 months out of the year, the rider, in fact, is quite weak. So the horse is taking the rider wherever it wants to go, pretty much, 11 months out of the year, because the rider just doesn't have that much control. It's in Ramadan where you flip the script. During the day, you stop feeding the horse. So you start weakening the horse. What do you do at nighttime? You feed the ruh. How? Qur'an, right? And that's why when you look through our tradition, you find the concept of siyam and qiyam tied together in Ramadan. And there's a reason why they're tied together. They come together like this, right? So man qama Ramadan, whoever stands in Ramadan, imanan wa ihtisaban, right? Whoever stands in Ramadan with iman and hoping for reward, Allah will forgive his sins, right? Man sama Ramadan, whoever fasts Ramadan, same hadith, right? It's the same wording. So they come together. There's a hikmah in that. So coming back to the concept of taqwa now, we see that taqwa, in fact, it's now weakening the horse. And it's also strengthening the rider in a sense. Okay? Now what happens is, when we started off, I start off with the very first ayah, not the very first ayah, second ayah of Surah Al-Baqarah, right? ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. What Ramadan does, because now this is the state that you're in, you are now primed for the Qur'an. Because you're almost automatically put in a type of taqwa which are not 11 months out of the year. Because the horses become weak and the rider is now getting more Qur'an, but they're primed for it. Because their taqwa is almost like it's natural because you're now controlling the horse. You've got control, right? Okay. So that was the first part. Now I said that I was going to, kind of connect some things between these ayat. So we start off by saying, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. All right? That's number one. So I'm going to skip over just because of time, the second ayah, and I'm going to the third ayah. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. The month of Ramadan is that in which was revealed the Qur'an, a guidance for people and clear proofs of guidance and the criteria. That's the brief translation. Okay, now the question is, why Ramadan? Why is it that Ramadan was chosen? What's the backdrop? Anyone want to give a crack? It's not a really complicated, it's a very easy answer actually. Why Ramadan? Thank you. The Qur'an was sent down on this night, right? Now here's the issue, however, and maybe you already know the answer to this. We know that the Qur'an came to the Prophet ﷺ over a period of how many years? 23 years. But we also know that it came down on one night. How do we reconcile those two things? Anyone know? Yeah. Okay. Brilliant, brilliant. So did everyone hear that? No? Okay. So and you'll notice this in the Qur'an as well. So just, if I can take a morphological break. All right. What I mean by that is kind of related to sarf, right, is what I'm talking about. When you look at the sending down of the Qur'an, there are two verb forms that are used to signify this, right? The sending down. One is, and its triliteral root is nazala, right? So one is nazala with the shadda on the zai, and the other one is anzala. Nazala refers to that which is done over over and over and over again, right? It's kind of, there's frequency here, over and over and over again. Anzala is done in like one shot. It's sent down just bam, once. Okay? The Qur'an is used, the Qur'an is described with both these verb forms. Tanzil and inzal, both of them. However, the previous scriptures, right? The Injil and the Torah are always described as inzal. So you look at that, you go to Surah Al-Imran, for instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, نَزَّلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ وَأَنزَلَ التَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. Right? So, نَزَّلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ. We have sent down, نَزَّلَ, piecemeal, over a period of time. It's the frequency is very high. The kitab, referring to the Qur'an, and then Allah juxtaposes that with وَأَنزَلَ التَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. The Torah and the Injil were sent down, boom, in one shot. And the scholars derive this from this morphological difference, which you would not pick up in English, by the way, right? So, coming back to this, how do we know that the Qur'an is both sent down on one night, or what do we mean by the Qur'an being sent down on one night and the Qur'an being sent piecemeal over 23 years? Well, it's sent down in one night on Laylatul Qadr from Lawh al-Mahfuz, where it is held by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the Sama' ad-Dunya, right? To the lowest heaven. This happens on Laylatul Qadr. And from there, that's where Jibreel alayhi salam comes, takes it and brings it to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam over a period of 23 years. So it happened on one night, so it's both inzal and tanzil. And there's something very beautiful about this, because why this has a type of beauty to it is because Imam Abu Shama, he says, and this is very profound, he says, in this way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How so? Number one, he has tied the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the prophets before him by having inzal, because all the prophets before him, it came down to one shot. And he is also at the same time distinguished and elevated the Prophet ﷺ, because now it comes down tandil, in piecemeal. So in fact, it's an elevation by tying the Prophet ﷺ to the previous prophets and distinguishing the Prophet ﷺ at the same time. So when we look at the Qur'an, we see that it comes down on Laylatul Qadr. All right? And I'm sure we spoke about Laylatul Qadr at some length yesterday. Sheikh Anwar went through all of the interesting aspects of Laylatul Qadr, right? By the way, this concept of coming down, did you speak about the angels coming down? And the angels coming to, like, the difference in verb form there as well? You didn't?
Not the difference in verb.
Ah, okay, man. What is going on? No, I'm kidding. The very same difference in verb form, it's interesting. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he talks about the angels coming down, in Surah Al-Qadr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions what? How does he mention the angels coming down? Who knows the ayah? Tanazzalul malaika waruh, right? So he sends down. So notice the word is tanazzul. How many tas are in the word? One, right? Okay, in another place in the Qur'an, I believe it's Surah Al-Furqan if I'm not mistaken, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also talks about angels coming down. But Allah there uses tanazzul with an extra ta. He says, تَتَنَزَّلُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ Sorry. تَتَنَزَّلُ I've got the wrong ayah here. And I've lost the ayah now. Okay. I'll try to do it from memory. تَتَنَزَّلُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ Right? That the angels come down upon them, right? And they say to them, do not fear and do not grieve. Now, what's the difference? The difference is when you have an extra letter in Arabic words, you find that it enhances meaning. And here, it's talking about frequency. So, tanazzul versus tatanazzul. Tatanazzul means it happens more frequently. The ayah that I just spoke about, tatanazzalu alayhimul malaika, is talking about when a person is dying. They see the angels coming, and the angels tell them, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. But in Surah Al-Qadr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, tanazzalul malaika, like they're coming down on this one night. Why? What's the difference here? The difference is that this one night is signifying the one ta, but throughout the entire year, people are dying. So angels are coming. So you have an extra ta to signify the frequency, extended frequency of angels coming throughout the entire year, right? And that comes from just the letter ta, an extra ta, right? Which is really amazing when you really think about kind of the nature of the Qur'an. Okay, how are we doing on time? Are we good so far? Yeah? Okay. So we spoke about fasting, we spoke about taqwa, we spoke about the human being, that is the constitution of two parts, right? The ruh, yeah.
Are there like more verses where it is similar pattern of extra?
Oh yeah, there's lots. Yes, absolutely. In fact, there's...
Use it the same way to like show frequency?
Of course. In fact, these verb forms, I mean, that's part of like when you study verb forms, that's what signifies one verb form being distinguished from another, right? So you have, the fa'ala and the af'ala forms. There's two different forms. And in different contexts, you would see that they're used in very similar ways, right? Frequency and things like that. So that's why studying Arabic is so much fun. I mean, people don't believe me, but, Anyway, okay. Any other questions? Sorry, I didn't really break for questions. Anybody else? Yeah.
Someone in the chat was asking in the horse and rider analogy.
Yep.
The horse is
The body.
and the rider is the mind or the ruh?
The ruh, right? Because again, it's the Qur'an is impacting the ruh, and this gets into a whole other thing that I can't really open right now, but it's related to the ruh and the fitra and so on and so forth, and so that would be a whole nother course basically, right? And Hamza knows this. Which inshallah, we have a course coming out just on that topic, on the fitra. So, but yeah, so for our analogy, it's the ruh. Okay. All right. So we started off by talking about fasting, taqwa, how that's related to Qur'an, why the month of Ramadan is the month that is related to fasting in the Qur'an, and so on and so forth. So we've tied these things together. Now let's move to kind of the end of Ramadan. So now we've experienced, we're like as if we're kind of traveling through Ramadan. Now we reach the end of Ramadan. Okay? We reached the end of Ramadan, and we've also reached the end of this group of ayat. And at the end of this group of ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, now, that what was the purpose? And it is to, as Allah says, that it is to complete the period. And, Sheikh Anwar went into that there's an end. There's a completion. That you start, on one day and you end on another day. And, and if you fast on either one of those days, it's haram, right? The day before and on Eid. You can't fast on those days, right? So there's a clear-cut completion of the month. So Allah says that, look, it's to complete the month, وَتُكَبِّرُ اللَّهَ عَلَى مَا هَدَاكُمْ, right? And it is to glorify, it is to elevate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from what He guided you to, okay? Now I'll come back to this point in just a minute, because this actually has a certain interesting da'wah benefit, which I'll come back to. And then Allah says, وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, so that you may be grateful. So you may be grateful for what though? That's the question. And in fact, this is why we're saying we're tying fasting with taqwa, with Qur'an, with our analogy, and it comes all the way to the end of shukr. What are we supposed to be grateful for? Well, in this analogy that I gave, that as this month goes through and you're going through the month, remember, we said 11 months out of the year, the rider is very weak. The rider is, in fact, maybe thirsty, maybe needs water, maybe he's on the point of death, right? What comes and rescues the rider? It's this month of Ramadan, where it's like, you imagine someone's just about to pass out, and they're just on the verge of dying, and you sprinkle some water on them, right? They're going to come out and be like, oh yeah, thanks man, that's really good, right? As if they're kind of coming out from slumber. So now, it's like you've now gone through a month of weakening the horse, and you've gone through the month of now Qur'an every single night. It's like that ruh, which was almost like kind of suppressed, is getting water in the first part of Ramadan. Someone's sprinkling it. And as it keeps getting water, it keeps kind of getting its strength back. As it kind of starts getting stronger and stronger. But as it does that, understand, it has a deep appreciation for what it didn't have before. And this is very important because look, if you were to take, let's say, a child, let's say like a 1-year-old, and let's say, this is 1-year-old kind of, actually, what age do children start crawling? My children are really old now. We're on 1, right? 1. Maybe even before, right? So let's say your child is crawling and they go into your wife's jewelry box and they find that big diamond that you bought for your wife, right? Because you love her so much. And they took at this diamond, and what would that child do with that diamond? Right? It's like, you're like, whoa, no, wait, no. Why? It doesn't know the value of that diamond. Why are you freaking out? Because you know the value. You're like, whoa, if that kid swallows it and then he lets it go somewhere where, the diaper gets changed and it's gone, that's what, $100,000 or whatever it is, whatever you paid for, $10,000 or whatever it is. So you understand the value of the diamond, the child doesn't. 11 months out of the year, the ruh gets suppressed so much that almost to the point where it doesn't understand the value of the Qur'an. But what happens now is that as it starts to now get more Qur'an, it starts to develop an appreciation for that which is giving it life. And that's, when someone's like going hungry for a really long time, like someone who's, let's say, almost on the verge of death, and you give him some water, and you give him something that you and I wouldn't think much about. Crackers. People don't think about crackers, right? So you give this man crackers, he's going to eat the cracker and be like, oh wow, it's the best cracker I ever had. Can I have another one? Right? And you're like, it's just a cracker, man. But that person, he's appreciating that cracker because he hasn't gotten it for so long. When it comes to this month, what happens by the end is that you've gotten so much Qur'an, it should be at the point where you've gotten it to the point where now you're back into life and you're appreciated. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, so that you may be grateful for this Qur'an that's now given you life, right? Now the last part of this, and that is that when it comes to this point of shukr, it leads to a turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in dua. And the next ayah right after that, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ دَاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. Right? So, and when my servants ask you, O Muhammad, concerning me, indeed I am near. I respond to the dua of the one making dua when he calls upon me. This ayah, it is extremely profound for a number of reasons. Okay? First, when you look at the ayah, and it says, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكِ عِبَادِي عَنِّي, when my servants ask you relating to me, right? Notice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to the Prophet ﷺ and saying, when my servants ask you concerning me, He doesn't say, tell them. Because typically, or many times in the Qur'an, when you get a question, Allah says, قُل, right? Like we said earlier, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ, they ask you concerning the ruh. What does Allah say? قُل, say to them, right? Such and such and such. And this is very often in the Qur'an. But it's missing here. It's not there. Okay, well, what's the significance of that? Because it is giving you the sense of a direct connection with the divine. So much so that even the Prophet ﷺ has been taken out of the picture. That when my servants ask you concerning me, فَإِنِّي قَرِيب, I am near. Not so near that even the Prophet ﷺ is not part of this equation. You are directly, Allah's that close to you. That's how close Allah is. Okay? That's number one. The second thing is that فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ دَاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. And I respond to the caller when he makes the call. Notice the response, he says, Ujibu da'wata da'i. I respond to the caller when he makes his dua. The response is before the actual dua. That's how close Allah is. The structure of this ayah is extremely powerful because the answer comes even before the person's calling. So it's like Allah is ready. He's so close that He's ready to just answer your dua. Okay? Another aspect that I just kind of failed to mention. إِذَا سَأَلَكَ إِبَادِي. There's an extra ya there. And when you go through the Qur'an, you find that there's two forms. One, ibadi without the ya, and ibadi with the ya. When it's with the ya, it includes everyone. It's without the ya, it's specific to a certain, let's say, group of people, right? So, I'm not sure if I have examples of this, but in this case, so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this, it is including any one of my slaves. When they call on me, indeed I am near, right? Ujibu da'wata da'i idha da'an, that I will answer the call when they make the call. So the point is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after this entire process that we went through, starting from, fasting, its relation to taqwa, its relation to the soul, its relation to the Qur'an, its relation to standing, and so on and so on and so forth, finally culminating to shukr, which then moves on to the point of dua, but a dua where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is extremely close to the person, ready to just answer that dua. But Allah gives a condition. It's not just, okay, you make dua and whatever you want, it's yours, right? فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي, right? وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. And so let him respond to me and believe in me so that they may be rightly guided. So it's conditional, even with that. It's not just an empty, like whatever you call, whenever you call, but it has a condition. Now, the last point I'll mention, and then we'll open up for, I guess, discussion, Q&A, or whatever it might be. And that was the da'wah point. One of the things that you will notice in the Sira is that in the first phase, the Meccan phase, the night prayer, was that fard upon the Sahaba? It was, right? Okay. That has a certain hikmah. Was fasting fard upon the Sahaba in the Meccan phase? Was there fasting in the Meccan phase? That's the deeper question, right? No, fasting doesn't start until the Madani phase. Okay? Notice that Qiyam al-Layl is fard in the Meccan phase, and it becomes, mustahab, let's say, not fard, but Qiyam al-Layl becomes something that you have an option, right? Once you come into Madani phase. Okay? However, fasting is something that's fard. You have Ramadan. Okay? When we talk about da'wah and we talk about, calling people to Islam, notice Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says at the end, وَلِتُكَبِّرُ اللَّهَ عَلَى مَا هَدَاكُمْ, that you may elevate the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You may elevate Allah. What does that mean? When you say Allahu Akbar, what does that what are you referring to? That Allah is greater than, and you can fill in the blank. That's how the structure is, right? No matter what you can think about, Allah is greater than that. But now here the point is that it's not just you just thinking that or you saying that, but now you are proactively glorifying Allah, and that is kind of the mission at hand, is that not only are you glorifying Allah and raising the name of Allah, but you are calling others to do so as well. So one of the other results of this month, of this training, like the Meccan period of the training of Qiyam al-Layl and so on and so forth, is this training continues with Qiyam al-Layl. In addition to that, it's fasting, because now you're primed for the Qur'an, and the result is now go off and elevate Allah's name. And of course, the other understanding of this is that it's the day of Eid, because we have, the takbirat and things like that. But there's the da'wah component as well. So I'll go ahead and stop there, and we can open it up for some discussion, inshallah, if you guys want, or not. We can call it an evening. So, okay, let's start with this. Does anyone have any questions? Because usually how I do this is either you have questions or I have questions. So we're going to see who is paying attention.
That was brilliant for back and forth, the body and soul, and that was a brilliant analysis.
Okay. Question? No question. Oh, jazakallah. Tayyib, inshallah. So it's my turn to ask you guys questions? Is that how this is going to work? Yes? You can ask now or otherwise if I'm going to start. And this is really fun for me because then I can just break and just, Yeah.
Can you explain again the Qur'an coming down in one day, the Laylatul Qadr, and like
Sure.
how
How do you reconcile that? So the Qur'an, right, it's in Lawh al-Mahfuz, which is the preserved tablet with Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we know from the hadith, told the pen to write. It said, oh my Lord, what do I write? He said, write everything, right? So it's written everything from the beginning of time till the end of time, okay? Among that is the Qur'an. So that is held with Allah in what is known as Lawh al-Mahfuz, which is the preserved tablet. So that Qur'an, right, that's there, it comes down in one shot to the lowest heaven, right? As-Sama' ad-Dunya, which is known as Sama' ad-Dunya. From there, then Jibreel alayhi salam brings it to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam piecemeal, as the situation calls for, by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obviously. So it comes down inzalan, like in one shot, from Lawh al-Mahfuz with Allah to the lowest heaven. That's inzal, that's one shot. Then tanzilan, it comes down piecemeal over 23 years from the Sama' ad-Dunya, from the lowest heaven to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, over 23 years.
So when we say the Qur'an was revealed in Ramadan, that's what we mean.
That's what we mean, exactly. It was on Laylatul Qadr that it came from Lawh al-Mahfuz to As-Sama' ad-Dunya.
And wasn't there also, didn't the Prophet peace be upon him get all of the Qur'an like at once? Wasn't there, didn't Jibreel like?
So we know that Jibreel alayhi salam used to come to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and recite and go over the Qur'an with him every Ramadan. And in the last Ramadan of his life, he went over it twice, right? But again, even the completion of the Qur'an, it was basically like, I think it was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, if I'm not mistaken, in Sahih Muslim, who mentions it was 9 days before the death of the Prophet ﷺ when some of the ayat related to riba came down, right? Yamhaqullahu riba wa yurbi sadaqat. Those ayat, they came down 9 days before the death of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So in its completion, most of it was recited with Jibreel alayhi salam. In Ramadan, the last Ramadan, it was recited twice, but there were still ayat that came down after that as well. So in its entirety, it wasn't necessarily recited with Jibreel alayhi salam in Ramadan. Yeah, and Allah knows best. Yes?
Going back to your analogy of the horse and the rider.
Right.
Is it necessary to weaken the body, the siyam and qiyam thing?
Sure.
Can you not have, is it necessary through the wisdom of Allah that you need to weaken the body to
Right.
give more focus to the soul?
Yeah, so that gets into a deeper discussion, and that has to do with what is the relationship between desires and sin. Okay? So desires are natural, right? And we understand that, like I was saying, desires in and of themselves are blind. They don't have a moral valuation. Okay? Moral valuation comes when you have the fitrah, right? You have an internal understanding, okay, that's wrong and that's right. And then you have revelation which tells you this is right, this is wrong. Okay? Now you have tools by which you can do that. Okay? So when does a sin happen? A sin happens not because you have a desire, it's because when you use that desire to go beyond what you should be doing. Right? Act upon it. So for instance, the Prophet ﷺ mentions that when the son of Adam does a sin, a black dot is placed upon his heart. Okay? And so what happens is that as you continue to do sins, you get more and more black dots on your heart. And that now serves as a way of kind of causing your spiritual death in a sense, right? It's only when you start repenting from those sins that now you start to kind of get resurrected. So there's a dynamic relationship between weakening the body and being able to sin less. Because when you weaken your desires, you're able to control your sins a lot better, right? When the desire is extremely strong, then it's easier to fall into sin, okay? And this is a cyclical relationship, right? So it's like you have desires, you have sin, and then one works off the other. So yeah, there's a deeper discussion there as well, though, that, you know, that actually is tied into Ayat an-Nur, right? Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. But you'll have to take the Fitra course to do all of that. Otherwise, we'll be here for the 3-4 hours. Yeah. Any other questions?
Another question for Sheikh Arafat. Have you had any channel checks? Do we know if yesterday was political?
From what I checked, probably not. I'll say that. Inshallah. No. Allahu Alam, I don't know. But from what from some of the things that I looked at and stuff, no.
Can we ask what the criteria is?
The sunrise.
No, it's just
Yeah. No, I'm not doing one of those. It's from the sun. So there are people around the world that track the sunrise. They take photographs, and they've been doing it for years. So it's not just.
So short answer is no.
Yeah, probably not. Based on the sun. But Allahu Alam, we don't know, you know what I mean? It's not definitive. The 23rd is looking like it was most likely. Yeah. I know a lot of people were saying the same thing. Allahu Alam, we don't know. I mean, there's still a few nights left, you know? So. اجتهد فيما بقى يغفر الله لك ما سلف. You know, if you excel in what is to come next, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will erase and forgive. You know, one of the, like Ibn Hajar, he tracks like almost 40 different opinions on when Laylatul Qadr is. One of the more controversial ones, and there's some modern mashayikh who hold this opinion. I don't personally, I think it's a cop-out. But I'm saying it just anyways. Yani, some of the mashayikh hold it where they say like Laylatul Qadr is your best night. And I'm like, really? Like that's. But he's saying this based upon the idea that if it's hidden and we don't know when it is, we can't definitively say, etc. Allah in His mercy, and He has husnul dhann here, fillah, right? Which is having good assumptions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that even if your worship didn't coincide with that He'll make it that your best night, you'll get the reward of that, yani, the one that you excelled the most in. So it doesn't mean that you just excel in one night and be like, that was my best, I'm done. You still have to excel in other nights as well, inshallah. No. Inshallah, yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
just kind of on that tangent. Is that like,
I don't agree. Like I said, I don't think it's.
well, like that, does that start off like people with other, like people on like 30?
لا هذا أهل الأعذار هذا أصلا they're already you know what I mean, included because of their udhr, right? We know that for sure. So if a woman like has an excuse, a man, he can't go to the masjid, he's sick, he's not able to pray as well, and this is why, by the way, intentions are so important, because you get the full reward of Laylatul Qadr even though you didn't worship because of your intention. And Allah knows it's a true intention. It's not like oh yeah, if I could go, I would have, but and then when it actually comes time to go, you don't go, or you never were going. It's a clear, conscious, pure intention. Allah will reward you. Which is why intentions are so important. Allah rewards you for deeds that you never did. It's a beautiful thing. There's nothing like this. You're getting, and this is why your intentions can take you places that your deeds never will. And you can get levels in Jannah where your deeds could never take you, but because of your intention, you'll get there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Ibn Hajar who also said that intentions are part of the ruh. Like when you think of intentions, like they're actually part of your ruh. They're not necessarily part of your material constitution. By the way, no one. I had a question in the beginning. No one really bothered saying, hey, wait a minute, why is it that we have taqwa in one case and taqwa and rahmah in another case? Did you guys forget? The first question I had. I don't care. Okay, khalas. All right. So remember we said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. So this is the book where there's no doubt a guidance for those who have taqwa. But then in Surah Al-Luqman, right? تِلْكَ آيَاتُ الْكِتَابِ الْحَكِيمِ هُدَى وَرَحْمَةً لِلْمُحْسِنِينَ. This is the verse of the wise book, a guidance and a mercy for the muhsineen. And this is really the key. Because when you think about ihsan, you can have ihsan for deeds that you do and things like that, and ihsan to other people. Taqwa is solely related to yourself and your relationship with Allah. But when you think of ihsan, it's not only you, but you can have ihsan towards your parents, right? You have ihsan towards other people. So it's not just you, you're doing more for other people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not only gives you huda, but also has mercy. Just like you have mercy on other people, that's why you have ihsan towards your parents and things like that, Allah then adds rahmah. And so that's one of the wisdoms perhaps in the extra word, because it's related to ihsan, being muhsinin. And Allah knows best. So any...
Yeah, I got a question from the sister's side.
Yep.
What is the correlation between waswas and nafs?
Oh dear.
And
So...
how can you tell the difference between both?
So, oh man, this is a long one. So it depends on what we mean by nafs, okay? And the issue is that depending on context, nafs can mean different things. So nafs can mean desire. Nafs can mean yourself, your ontological self. Nafs can mean the state of where you are in relation to your ruh and your kind of your, how strong your ruh is related to your body. Let's put it that way. So if your ruh is very strong, you have nafsul mutma'inna, right? If it's weaker, then you have nafsul lawama. And if the horse is very strong and your desires are taking you everywhere and you're sinning a lot, then that's nafs bi amaratu bisu, like it's encouraging you to do evil deeds. Okay. So now there's a whole discussion on nafs, and so you're talking about wiswas, right? The way, what is the connection between the two? I mean, generally, waswasas come from, in a sense, desires. And so that's why when we talk about nafs, we talk about it in the context of nafs meaning desires. So that's basically the connection between the two. Is there another part of that question, or how to deal with waswas, or probably? So now, how do you deal with waswas? Well, one of the first things is that you seek protection from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the first element to waswas. Because these are, internal things that happen, and that you need assistance with that, in any sort of domain that you're working in, especially spiritual domains. And that connection with Allah helps you to kind of get rid of those things. Beyond that, having knowledge. I'll tell you about a waswasa that a friend of mine was experiencing, and that was, he was experiencing a waswasa of his wudu. And this is actually very common, where people would make wudu, and then they get a doubt. Do I have wudu or I don't have wudu? And then they go make wudu again, and they come out and it's like, wait a minute, I think I missed a spot on my elbow, so maybe I go do it again. And so the person is now, because of the waswasa, they're going over and over and over again.
Every community has this guy.
Yeah, this guy is prevalent everywhere. And so
Do you guys have him here?
Yes.
So what happens is that one way of battling this, obviously you seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help, but it's by understanding certain elements of fiqh, for instance, right? We know that, for instance, al-yaqeen la yuzulu bi-shak. Certainty is not removed by doubt, okay? So if that's the case, you made wudu, you have certainty, what you doubt is, okay, I missed a spot. But certainty is not removed by doubt. If you're certain you made wudu at one point, khalas, that's it. Now you can hold it that's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So it comes from not only seeking Allah's help, right? By way of dua and by way of, istighfar and things like that, but also gaining knowledge. And specifically, I would say knowledge of the Sharia, because that is the thing that allows you to kind of transcend these type of waswas. Allah knows best. Did you want to add to that? No. Any other questions?
The way to battle, you just continue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You keep
Don't
going.
Go back. Yeah, just continue.
Yeah.
Because the same thing with salah. If a person has waswas at how much they prayed in the salah, like if it's a one-off, that you do the minimum. You go back. Okay, what am I sure of? I go back, etc. But if this happens every day, that is a problem. You don't pay attention to it. Continue, meaning you don't build on the minimum.
And I'll tell you, I taught this to my kids very early, only because so that they wouldn't, like, for instance, if someone's coming, let's say they prayed Dhuhr and they're coming to Asr, and then they're like, okay, do I have wudu or I don't have wudu? So now this is the doubt, right? But you prayed Dhuhr, so you definitely had wudu for Dhuhr. That's what's certain. What's doubtful is, did I break my wudu? Okay, so where you now say, okay, you know what, certainty is strong, like the doubt doesn't overtake certainty, and so therefore I'm certain I have wudu for Dhuhr, I just leave it alone now and I'm going to go pray. Khalas, right? And so that kind of helps you to navigate through these things. Otherwise, you could be going back and forth on many things, and this applies to the salah itself. What rak'ah were you on? Like if you don't know if you're on the third rak'ah or the second rak'ah, you're certain about the second rak'ah, you assume the second rak'ah, right? And so on. Many, many implications, right? And these are qawaid al-fiqhiyah, which are really, really important, I think, that everyone should study. By the way, these qawaid, especially this one, al-yaqeen la yuzul bishak, I think I mentioned this in the debate as well, and that is that even legal principles, when we talk about what do we assume about someone? Well, if we assume fitrah, that they are good, pure, sinless in a sense, that's the state that you're born in, that's the assumption, that's what you're certain about. And it's only, you're going to then assume that the person did something wrong or did something evil. That principle, it's so fitri, it's so part of the fitrah, that in every legal system, even trans-historically, you have that principle, innocent until proven guilty, right? You're certain of innocence and you have to prove guilt. You will find very rarely that the opposite happens, that the person assumed guilty and then they have to prove their innocence. And that, again, it's not only, it's trans-historic, trans-cultural. In most cultures, I have yet to find a legal system where they start with guilt and they move to innocence. As much as the Christians would like to say that, no, you're born in a state of guilt and you have to then move to innocence by way of Jesus Christ or whatever it is. So, anyway. Any other questions?
You guys want to read the question in the chat? The US chat?
Says, so nafs is the strongest part, either ruh or horse or in between. What is aql and qalb?
Yeah, you'll have to take the course for that one, man. Like that's just, yeah, that's just one of those because the thing is that in the course we get into this, right? Is that correct, Hamza? Right? We get into the relationship between aql, the relationship between aql and fitrah and ruh and nafs, the levels of the nafs and all of those things, and those are very important to know because once you know that, it's very empowering. Right? Because then you understand when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions something about the nafs, this context, like what is it referring to? Right? But honestly, that we'd be here all night. So I'm going to refer you to the course. It's coming out soon, inshallah, on the Sapiens Institute website, inshallah. So, how much does it cost? It costs $1 billion. No, it's our course. All our material is free, right? And so that's why we were doing the fundraising earlier on. That's why anyone here that would like to, donate to Sapiens, I'll encourage you to do that. You can go to our website, sapiensinstitute.org. If you can't remember that, you can go to donatesi.org. That might be easier. And sign up for a $10 a month donation. That helps us bring all of these courses and work to as many people as possible. So, jazakumullah khair. Anybody else? All right, let me leave you guys on a note about dua. Can I do that? we'll conclude with that inshallah. So we mentioned that at the end of those ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions dua. Now I think a lot of times when we think about our dua, we approach it in almost a robotic way. I remember Shaykh Muhammad al-Sharif, Allah yarhamhu, he once talked about this, and this was, to me, was quite profound. He says that as you get older, people always tell you to be realistic, right? They're always telling you, be realistic. So first, when you're young, you have this great imagination, right? When you look at kids and children and things like that, fantastic imaginations, right? As a child, you can be like, when I grow up, I'm going to be a person who slays a dragon, rides on his back through the sky, and then I'll go to my castle and I'll be the king of the castle. Whatever. Just the imagination runs wild. And so you have these amazing things. And by the way, children don't like contradictions. So this is very interesting because they can have wild imaginations, but you can never come to a child and be like, look, I'm going to give you this cookie that I'm not going to give you. Right? You'd be like, okay, my dad is smoking some major weed of some sort. Something's going on, right? So it's interesting, right? So imaginations, but what happens is, as you grow older, you keep getting hammered with this concept of be realistic, be realistic, be realistic. So now you say, okay, like, you know what? I want to be, I don't know, I want to have a career in film. And your parents say, beta, right? Doctor, right? Like, what are you talking about, film, right?
No,
be realistic.
It's like, you want to be director.
Director.
You should be doctor.
Yeah, exactly. So everyone pushes you to who was it? Imam Tom said the holy trinity of Muslims, right? Doctor, engineer, lawyer. So everyone says be realistic, be realistic. So everyone's now, and what happens is that you get so ingrained with being realistic, your du'as become realistic. And what happens is you start limiting yourself based on your limitations. So your du'as now are, oh Allah, I want to get married to this woman. Oh Allah, this happens. Or just the things that are just, which you think are possible. But what the reality of dua is that it transcends what you think is possible. That's the very concept of dua, right? Is you're supposed to think big. And so when you're making dua, you've got to get out of the rut of you've been in this situation where it's just been be realistic, be realistic. Don't be realistic. Make your du'as ones that are inspirational, right? If you want to memorize the Qur'an and you see these huffaz, they're like, man, this guy took 10 years or whatever it might be. Khalas, this is, you call out to Allah. O Lord of Zakaria, who gave him the child at such an old age. O Lord of Zakaria, I'm 50, I want to memorize the Qur'an, let's do it, right? No matter how impossible you think it is. And by the way, it's very natural. Like if you remember, speaking of Zakaria alayhi salam, remember when Zakaria alayhi salam came upon Maryam alayhi salam, and he sees all of that food, right? And some of the scholars say that was food out of season, right? So, and for us, the concept is very strange because no fruit is out of season, right? It's just, you just go down to, I don't know what grocery store you guys have here. What's your main grocery store here? Publix? That name is so weird, man. Every time I see it, I think of something completely different. Anyway, but and everyone I know thinks of it that way. And I'm always like, why would you name your store that? We have H-E-B, right? Yeah. And Kroger. Well, yeah, we have Kroger and H-E-B, but Publix is again, anyways, probably shouldn't speak about that in the masjid. But so, where was I going with this, man? So fruits out of season. So Maryam alayhi salam, fruits out of season perhaps, or fruits, some people say, like some of the mufassirin say they were from Jannah or whatever it might be. And so Zakaria alayhi salam says, Anna laki hada, what is this? Like these fruits and things like that, as if he's surprised, right? And Maryam alayhi salam, what does she say? What does she respond to him? She says, huwa min indillah, right? Yarzuqu man yasha bi ghayri hisab. And Allah gives without any hisab. I always think about that when you start managing a household, you always do a budget, or hopefully you're doing a budget, right? So you're always looking at your income, you're looking at your expenses, how much do I make? I get my paycheck every 2 weeks, this is my bills, and so what are you doing? Hisab, right? But what is Maryam alayhi salam saying to Zakaria alayhi salam? She's saying that Allah is the one that doesn't have this concept of hisab. That's your limitation, right? In other words, transcend your limitations. You do hisab, but Allah, بِغَيْرِ hisab. There's no hisab. And in fact, that's when هُنَالِكَ دَعَى زَكَرِيَّا رَبَّهُ. That is when is as if Zakaria now just says, you know what? You're right. That Allah doesn't have, like there's no limitations when it comes to Allah. So one aspect of dua, make aspirational du'as, especially in you know, as Ramadan is coming to an end, this is the time to do it, right? That you now planning the rest of your year, plan it something that is just truly aspirational.
You know that. I don't know if you heard the story with Sheikh Muhammad al-Sharif about the dua, but he did it with Sheikh Muhammad Faqih.
I didn't hear that story. What is that story?
Man. Yeah. No, this. Sheikh Muhammad is my colleague in Memphis. And he doesn't like sharing these personal stories because, you know,
Sharing it.
I'm sharing it because he's not here. But it's a good one. Him and his wife, may Allah preserve them both, they had been trying to have kids for like 10, almost 12 years. And no success, right? And he's getting older. He often, he says this. He's like, if I had kids when I was younger, because people underestimate how old he is. He's actually, anyways, I don't want to expose him there too. Inshallah, he retains his youth. So 10, 12 years, you're married, no kids. Khalas, you start, you're like, qadar, khalas, what am I going to do? Sheikh Muhammad al-Sharif, you know what he did? He's like, you haven't had kids yet? He's like, la. He's like, okay, we're going to do two things. Right now, we're going to make a dua right now with me. You ready? He's like, come on, don't make it awkward. Like, what is he? He's like, we're going to make right now. Wallah, and he's asking. He's like, Ya Rab, I want a boy and I want a girl and he wants this. Ameen. And none of this, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go shopping for kids' clothes right now. And Shaykh Muhammad is like, what the heck? So they did. They literally went the same day. They went to a kid's clothes store and he bought clothes for, he's like, we don't know what it's going to be, so I'm going to buy for a boy and I'm going to buy for a girl. And you know what he had a year later? Twins, a boy and a girl. He used both. And I teach them now at the Islamic school. The kids. And then Allah gave him another son after that, Abdullah. So, بالضبط.
He knows his community.
That's what you buy the ring now.
You save up now.
Yeah. You guys, like his yaqeen, Shaykh Muhammad al-Sharif, Allah yarhamu, may Allah have mercy on him, he would approach it with that level of certainty. Yeah. There's no limitation, it's going to happen. Right? And subhanallah. So yeah, he always had that mentality.
SubhanAllah. Yeah, and you know, when it comes to your du'as, make aspirational du'as. Because what ends up happening is when you get in realistic, let's be realistic, you're not really making du'a to Allah, you're making du'a to yourself. Right? If you really think about it, because now you've limited and so, okay, I'm capable of this. So who are you really making du'a to? Right? You're making du'a to your own self, your own limitations, right? The second thing that I'll mention is that remember who is the one that you're calling out to, right? So, you know, I think it was Sufyan al-Thawri said that the person who knocks often on the door, soon that door will be open. And someone responded to him, because may Allah have mercy upon you, O Sufyan, whoever told you there was a door in the first place, right? Like, who said there's even a door? And as we just got done, reciting the ayah, that the answer actually comes even before the request, even before the condition. So this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that's answering and waiting, right? The third thing is, if you have du'as that you've been doing over and over again, you've got to get out of and kind of refresh them, right? Because like if you make the same du'a, it's almost become ada, right? It's almost become habitual. And the thing is that as you grow up, you change as a person, right? So if you're making the same dua for 30 years, you've got to mix it up a little bit, right? I'll tell you, there's I found something really interesting. It's an ayah that du'at like to use. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. That, we will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves. You know where you see this ayah? You always see it like about the horizons, and you'll see some sort of like rose-colored, space and rose, and and so we will show them our signs. And people forget that it's not just in the horizons, but وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, and in themselves. Now what's interesting about this ayah, again we'll get into a little bit of Arabic very quickly, is that it starts off with a seen. In other words, the verb of to see or show them is in the future tense. Whenever a person reads this, it will always be in the future tense. Meaning, there's never going to be a time when you will look for signs and you won't see them in the horizons and in yourself. Because the person you were at 12 years old is a different person that's 15, is a different person that's 20, that's a different person that's 30, 40, 50. So if you are now constantly, so this ayah, whenever you read it, the next day, the next month, it'll be almost someone else that's there, and you as a person that changes. وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, and in themselves. Why am I mentioning that? Just like you grow and change and develop and so on and so forth, your du'as grow, change, and develop, to mix them up, right? So to get out of the monotony. So that's the other element of du'a, inshallah. And the last thing that I'll mention, that don't let your sins become an impediment. And because you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A lot of times what happens is people say, well, I'm not good enough, right? That I've done all of these sins. And when you say that, okay, look, so Allah won't forgive me, for instance. I've sinned too much. What in essence you're saying, it's not about the sin, it's about the one who's going to forgive the sin. In other words, you have now taken the sin and given it a status greater than the forgiveness of Allah. And that's a mistake. Because in essence, when you say that, like there's a sin that Allah won't forgive, you're saying that Allah's forgiveness is constricted. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the exact opposite, that His mercy is vast. So don't let this be an impediment, because it's not about you, it's about Allah. It's not about your sin, it's about the vastness of Allah's forgiveness, subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So, in a sense, it's like, don't be so full of yourself that you think your sin is all that in a bag of chips, right? Your sin is not that great compared to the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when it comes to that, don't let that be an impediment, all right? I guess that was my last remark, inshallah, related to dua. And there's a lot more we can say, yeah.
Understanding, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala,
Yeah.
Are our specific ad'iyat necessarily makruh, or are they just, because
So give me an example. What do you mean?
it's not, like you mentioned, like making, instead of saying like Allah, rizqani, or just instead of making general like ad'iyat,
Mhm.
because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works in ways that we don't understand.
Sure.
So if you're limiting Allah, it's disrespectful.
Sure. Yeah.
Is making specific ad'iyat, like, oh, I want this car, I want this wife, like, is that
So why would that be limiting Allah? Like that's not,
it's like one plate?
because you're asking for something specific?
Like I'm saying, is that
No, I don't see like I don't see what the issue is, right? Like unless maybe I'm not. Do you want to clarify or what?
Is it like, because
So oh, go ahead.
I'm saying, I read that, like, for example, for a wife, right? Is that,
Well, like I want to marry that specific woman, like that. Is that what you mean?
like that, or like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give me like, help me
A
get
supermodel hafida, right?
Wait, that exists? Is that real?
We find out later it's not.
like you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to like bless you in a certain path, like through a certain thing, because you're telling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala how to do something.
Well, you can always.
I
Yeah.
can hear it, Malik Sheikh. It's online. That is makruh. That's what he's saying.
Oh, I see. Look, I mean, I think if you, with all respect to the Maliki Sheikh, as long as you kind of put it in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, if this is best for me.
No.
Allah, bless it for me if this is best for me. That's the important thing. Right. Yeah, that's true. Then that's a matter of istikhara. Right.
Wallahu
Wallahu ta'ala.
like it, yeah.
Yeah. Inshallah. Any other? Yeah.
If Allah says, "Ujubu da'wat ad-da'i idha da'an,"
Mm-hmm.
and He responds with one of the three ways of response,
Mm-hmm.
for a material dua, for example, and
Yeah.
He responds with, like, for example, He says, "Okay, not now, maybe in the hereafter."
Yeah.
How does making dua over and over change it? Does it change it?
All right. So,
The response.
is the response changed
Yeah.
with making dua over and over again? I don't know if we can say it's changed, right, from a qadr standpoint. But what we can understand is that the asking of Allah over and over again, sometimes that is the answering of the dua. Because look, think about dua, right? What is happening when you're making dua? There's a number of things that are happening. Number one, the first thing that you are affirming that Allah exists. First thing. Because otherwise, why are you making dua? Second thing, you are affirming that you lack power and Allah has power. The third thing, let's say you're affirming, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can hear you, hear your dua, right? And you can keep on going. So if you think about it, dua in and of itself is something that is beloved to Allah, right? Because in a sense, you're affirming so many different things. So the more you make dua to Allah, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves it. And by the way, this is the opposite with human beings, correct? Like the more you ask someone, eventually they get annoyed, right? It's like, yo, can I borrow $100? Can I borrow $100? Can I borrow $100? Eventually the guy will stop picking up your calls, right? So human beings are the opposite. But with Allah, the more you ask, the more He loves you. Okay, and let's say another attribute is wisdom. Because you are asking over and over again, you are trusting the wisdom of Allah that He knows timing, you don't know timing. Because Allah has all of the factors, right? As Hamza says, that He has the picture, you only have a pixel, right? If He has the picture, He knows in His wisdom when is the right time for, let's say, you to get married, right? So you ask over and over and over again because of the fact that you're making dua to Allah, you're affirming all of these things, and it's something that's beloved to Him, right? And it's in His wisdom, so you're affirming His wisdom. That timing, you leave that in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does it make sense? Yeah. I don't know if I answered that question, but I think I did. All right. Yeah.
So, like, in the case of the sheriff saying, like, go out and buy baby clothes, right? Like,
Right.
this is gonna happen. Like, how, like, isn't, like, just because you make dua doesn't mean, like we said, like, you might not get it. Like,
So-
you might not get it at all. Like, that's still Allah's.
Yeah, that's true, and you're content with that. But there's another concept of dua is that you have to be confident in your dua.
Feel like so confident in you.
Yeah, why not? Like someone says, like, look, let's put it this way. If let's say you know your father, right, and if you're in some sort of jam, you're generally like, okay, if I ask my dad, I'm pretty sure, very confident that he's going to help me, right? If that's your dad, right, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, who loves you more than your dad does, cares about you more than your dad does, knows more than your dad does, right? So you know for a fact your dua is going to be answered. So having that confidence is actually one of the etiquettes of dua. So yes, okay, let's say it doesn't happen the way you think it's going to happen. You buy the baby clothes, you don't get the baby. Okay, you save them until you do get it. Khalas, right? And you keep going.
I mentioned this when I was here last month. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah, he built the minbar 20 years before he conquered Al-Aqsa. 20 years.
Nuruddin Zengi.
Yeah.
Nuruddin Zengi built it.
No, I think it was Salahuddin,
It's Nuruddin Zengi who built it.
but it was 20 years.
It was 20 years.
Yeah.
And then Salahuddin is the one that took it.
Installed it, yes. But it was 20 years between its building and finally installing it. But they knew, they're constantly obviously making dua, they're doing everything that they can. But it took them 20 years. So.
No, but the interesting thing is it happened after he died.
Yeah.
So it still happened for Nuruddin Zengi, who preceded Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. Like he built it, I think it was 20 years, right? Beforehand, and it was Salahuddin that took it and actually installed it, right?
Because it was it was the duplicate of the one in Damascus. Because Salahuddin had to go, and unfortunately, before he took care of the Crusades, he had to take care of the Muslims. So he had to go take Damascus because the leader that was there before was a collaborator, he was a traitor, he was working with the Crusaders. So he had to go take over Damascus, rebuilt the masjid, built a brand new minbar, and then he said, we're going to build a second, we're going to build a duplicate, and we're going to install it in Masjid al-Aqsa. 20 years it took them from that moment. So, you could buy the baby clothes and not use them. Because Zakaria, how old was he when he had a kid? Yeah, very old. اشتعل الرأس شيبة. You know, completely gray hair. خلاص. Yes. You know, we limit ourselves, right? Like I said, I think you got to put that yaqeen in the dua, and sometimes doing that physically helps the yaqeen. Yeah, and don't limit yourself, like you said. You know, sometimes you ask for. we limit ourselves all the time. You're asking for a specific person. Allah has someone better for you. Don't. Yani, every no is closer to the yes that's good for you, that Allah knows is good for you. Right? I've met many people who said they got rejected many times, and it's like, alhamdulillah, for every rejection that led me to the wife that I actually finally got. Every single time. It's true. I saw a brother, he lives, I don't want to say where he lives, but he lives somewhere in Texas. Wallah, I saw him get rejected. Personally, me, saw it at least half a dozen times. Wallah. And one time it drove him nuts. Like he met, I don't know why, he had this thing where like if he saw a niqabi sister, khalas, he's dead. Like that's his ideal. And so he met, she was a convert, niqabi, and he was head over heels, scheme. But then when he talked to her, she's like, talk to my wali. He's like, yes, she passed first test. She doesn't talk to strange men. I like it. You know, all these things. But then she had this grueling test, miskeen, where she had like hundreds of questions. Wallah, and I'm not joking because I heard them. I would hear them on the phone. And I'm like, Abdurrahman, what the heck are you guys doing? Wait, I said his name. I'm sorry. And miskeen, she was asking questions. I'm like, how is this even relevant to like anything? You know, it should be giving him weird scenarios that would never happen. You know what I mean? Like, what would you do? Let's say hypothetically, I'm over at my parents' house, and then this happens, and this, and he's like, sister, you haven't talked to your parents in so long. It's just like, just answer the question, you know, kind of thing. And it's like, okay, wallahi, God, yani. Anyways, it didn't work out. And I told him, say, alhamdulillah, she would have driven you nuts, man, later on in marriage. Alhamdulillah, I'm telling you, mashallah, may Allah bless them, yani his wife now and everything. I know that he's saying alhamdulillah for every single no that led him to his wife that he has now. Absolutely. So when you keep an open mind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you put that trust, He'll take care of you. Wallah, when a person knows that and understands it, they will never be disappointed by Allah's decree, ever. Wallah. Wallahi. You could lose, like the people of Gaza, they lose everything, and he's still okay, radi. He's content. He's like, I'm here. I know that this is for something better, for something good. Allah has something better for us. So whether it's in the war or in peace, you know, not to quote Tolstoy, but you know, in war, sometimes it's easy to say, I'm content, I'm okay, because I see the bigger picture. When it comes to ourselves, we don't see the bigger picture. Later on in life, you'll see the bigger picture, and you're like, alhamdulillah for everything that happened. Right in the middle of the difficulty, you're like, man, I met a guy, yani miskeen, he went through moments of poverty, lost so much. Later on, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made him, you know, better, he says, alhamdulillah for those moments of, because in the moment, you're not saying alhamdulillah. You're like, why is this happening to me? But then later on in life, you look back and you're like, man, if it weren't for that, I wouldn't be the man that I am today, and I wouldn't appreciate the blessings that Allah has now given me. I had to go through those trials to fully appreciate Allah's blessing for me now. But we don't see it when you're in the middle of the test. We don't see it. We only see it later.
And this is why it becomes in the middle of the test is when you need to know Allah the most. So, and I think someone was asking that earlier today about something, and I said, look, you know, you study the names and attributes of Allah. Know who Allah is, right? Know Allah in times of difficulty, or know Allah in times of ease, and Allah will know you in times of difficulty, right? But that requires knowing Allah, right? Studying His names and attributes. And you know, I'm usually surprised, which I shouldn't be anymore, but how many people don't actually study the names, right? It's like you're worshiping Allah. That's the whole, your whole purpose in life, and you don't know who you're worshiping, right? So, and then that's why the Qur'an, what do they say, that every single page has, you know, the names and attributes of Allah. There's a reason for that, right? To know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Because the more you know Him, the more that you worship Him, you love Him, you have hope, right, in His mercy, you have fear of His wrath, you trust Him, tawakkul starts to build the more you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what you need when you're in the middle of the storm, more than anything else, right? It's like that one brother, I think I mentioned this last time I was here, I'm not sure, but you know, back in 2008, he lost everything. 2008 was the financial downturn in Silicon. Did I mention that last time? I don't know. 2008, he lost everything. He was in Silicon Valley. Those of you know about Silicon Valley, they're not rich, they're uber rich, right? They're just like, it's on another level. So he 2008 happened. It was a financial downturn that was vicious. He lost everything. So he had to pull his kids out of private school. He had to sell his, you know, gazillion-dollar house. You know, houses that are very expensive. And he was telling this story to a sheikh. He said, you know, as I was pulling out, and my family was in the car with our U-Haul. We had sold everything. He's probably moving to Texas, right? But anyways, I don't know where he was going. But anyways, it seems like everyone's coming to Texas. But anyway, so he said I was leaving, and because I just, for some reason, I was depressed. I was down. My whole world had come crashing down on me. He says, for some reason, I decided to stop by the masjid, and I just wanted to just stop by the masjid. So he says he walked in, and he fell into sajda, and he started crying and crying and crying. And he says, he was talking to a sheikh, he says, Wallahi sheikh, that moment of closeness that I had with Allah, at that moment, I would not trade all the money in the world. That one moment that I had, like he had not felt that much ikhlas and closeness and nearness to Allah, just having fallen down in tears before Allah. He said, if I lost everything for that moment, it was 100% worth it, right? So, again, knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's extremely important, right? And that goes by way of studying His names and His attributes, right? How they're related to you, your life, and, you know, and it help you when you're making dua. That was the other point. You use His names and attributes, you know, inshallah. So, Allahu alam. Any other questions for Sheikh Anwar?
You can ask about anything, guys, except for cryptocurrency. We don't.
I looked at the courses at Sapiens Institute.
Yeah.
Are you guys constantly adding new courses?
Yeah.
Are they kind of all geared towards that, or just general education about Islam in general? Or
No, so our area of focus is what you could say like academic dawah, right, in a sense. And so dawah is not just to non-Muslims, but also to fortify our own iman, to empower Muslims, and to empower Muslims to kind of go toe-to-toe with any other ideology that's out there, right? So as I was saying earlier on today, it's not just, the technical term is not just apologetics, but it's polemics we want Muslims to be involved in. Apologetics would be your intellectual defense, right? So this is how we defend the Islamic worldview. Polemics is like the offense. You start now looking at, okay, you have these ideologies, how do we now deal with them? And how do we go, just toe-to-toe with them? Obviously in a way that imbues our character of being merciful and kind and calling people to Islam. So our courses are kind of more geared towards that domain, that space. Like general Islamic studies, there's plenty of people that are already doing that. The issue is that I don't think anyone is actually doing proper coursework in these domains, in these areas, right? Like LGBTQ, our course, I don't know any other course that has 30 hours of course material by Dr. Khalid Sharif, and he goes into every nook and cranny of detail you can possibly. No, I mean seriously. I was just sitting in on when he was doing the recording, And there were things in there that I was like, wow, this, I didn't even know this was a shubha, right? And so, scholars that had, written poetry about, homosexuality, and so a lot of Muslims don't know that. Yeah. So a lot of Muslims don't know that.
My grandfather was talking about Abu Nawas and some of the stories around him.
Yeah. Yeah, but the problem is, like, when a Muslim isn't equipped like that, if people will find these things, right? Especially, Orientalists, or what they're known now as postmodernists, they'll find these things. They'll come and say, oh, you had gay people in your, whatever, and this can really just throw off a person. So the fact that if they don't know, and so the fact that you have 30 hours of content on this one topic, I mean, it's very empowering. And other topics as well: secularism, liberalism, feminism. All of the isms and schisms and all of that, and then kind of starting ground up, so we're trying to actually make it into a proper curriculum where we have kind of essentials. So we teach things like ulumul Qur'an, but not just a purely like Islamic scholarship point of view, but also how do you deal with some of the shubuhat that come, like the qira'at and things like that, and the ahruf, and because those things, not for some reason, we know the reason, but they became kind of problematic. So how do you equip Muslims to deal with that? Kind of some basics on usul al-hadith, mustal al-hadith, and things like that, to give Muslims be able to kind of have them understand not just usul al-hadith from the technical point of view, right? That this is sahih, this is hasan, this is so on and so forth, the da'if jiddan. So now you've got the categorization. But then you have, okay, what is the value of testimony? So now there's a philosophical angle, right? That we're not just saying this is the science of hadith, but why is the science of hadith so important? And that how do we understand testimonial knowledge? Because in the West, testimonial knowledge is not something that's highlighted, right? But most of the things we know come from the say-so of somebody else, right? The world is round, not because we traveled to outer space, because someone else took pictures or we read it in a book or something else. Most of what we know is testimonial. And once you bring that to someone, say, hold on a second, before you start knocking hadith, if most of what we know is by way of testimony, hadith is the only system on the planet, trans-historically, throughout history, that took testimony and made it robust, academic, and thorough. So now you're going to come and knock hadith, you have to knock your entire worldview. So you see, it's just an example. So even if we're going to be taking like baseline Islamic studies courses, we want to bring it in such a way that arms Muslims, kind of equips Muslims to fortify their own iman, and then, also call people to Islam. Inshallah. Sure. For Imam Anwar.
You brought up the example earlier in the evening about the gentleman who was a hafiz and had
Yeah.
a lot of severe doubts and
Yeah.
almost dislike or disdain for Islam. Those apparently there's enough of people like that, but do you think their biggest problem is really not having true understanding of Islam and not really studying, or is it just the outside world looks so glamorous and tempting
Yeah.
that it's causing them to say, FOMO type?
Right. Right.
I was going to say, those are two sides of the same coin. So we have two types of fitan. It's a fitna anyways. Fitan al-shubuhat, fitan al-shahawat. Right? The fitan of doubts, like intellectual to the mind, and the fitan of shahawat, desires, which are the base, etc. And so every fitna, every trial is in one of these two categories. Sapience deals with the first, fitan al-shubuhat. Fitan al-shahawat, with the desires, that's your own spirituality, that's your own, which needs to develop your worship, your taqwa, all these other things, which we're still focusing on. But that's what most of the masajid, most of the a'imma deal with, is fitan al-shahawat, or at least they should be. But
So I'll just add one other thing. So because we have,
misled by either.
so I will say one of the benefits of like one of our projects is Lighthouse Mentoring, right? I mentioned that you could go online, that we were able to collect about 3 years of data, right? So now it's, being like modern and data driven or whatever it might be. Yeah. But what we noticed is that we need to conclude. Okay. What we noticed is that most of the people that say they have intellectual doubts, like, oh, I doubt this hadith, I doubt this. In fact, there's something that's behind it. Either they had some problems at home, they had some other issue with their parents, they had some, so usually it's something completely different, right? Sometimes it could be a shahwa, right? A desire because they want to do, but even that has a source, right? So part of like the mentorship program, and this is something that we teach in our courses as well, is that how do you find out what's going on? Because if you just try to answer the question, then you just answered a question. You've actually covered something. There's something much deeper. Our Dawah training course, what we call advanced level Dawah training course, Awaken the Truth Within, we actually go through like characteristics of, human beings and, maybe elements of psychology and things. How do you like unravel that? How do you diagnose that is really the job of the Da'iyah. And so it's not just winning the intellectual argument, it's actually knowing that you're speaking to a human being. And that's something that we stress a lot. And that, and when you understand that, it actually gives you an appreciation for the prophets and messengers, right? Because they didn't come with just intellectual arguments. They had to deal with the entire shakhsiyah, the entire personality, the entire human being that has a qalb, a ruh, a fitra, and so on and so forth, that has desires and shubuhat and shahwat and so many different things. And when you understand that, then it equips you to be more merciful, more compassionate, and kind of get to the source of the problem. One thing that we always teach is you don't have to answer every question, right? And a lot of times Muslims get into answering every single question, and it can bleed in, it can get into some trouble, right? So Allah Ta'ala alam. But so I think we need to conclude now. Jazakumullah khair to TMC for hosting us. Really appreciate it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless TMC, bless the entire Jama'ah, bless you and your families. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of your qiyam, your siyam, your sadaqat, your amal. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to meet again, inshallah, if I return to Tampa. And if not, then inshallah that we meet in Jannat al-Firdaus, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. جزاكم الله خير سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك